Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'd like to take a look at some older card designs and kind of go over why I think they used to be really cool, and maybe offer some reasoning as to why Pokemon changed the way they design cards, because they are pretty different to what they used to be. So first up, I just want to take a look at this old mechanic, Level X. So essentially, what Level X was, for those of you who are not familiar, is essentially its evolution, but it's not exactly like evolution in terms of you're changing the Pokemon. It's just evolution in that that Pokemon itself is getting stronger. So Regigigas Level X would go on top of Regigigas, and it had this really cool attack. The attack is cool, but I meant to say the Pokepower there. The Pokepower Sacrifice, it says once your turn, which is a bit merciless, but basically you can choose one of your Pokemon in play, and that Pokemon is knocked out, so you just sacrifice one of your own Pokemon. It's a bit morbid. But then you search your discard pile for up to 2 basic energy cards, and then attach them to Regigigas, and remove 8 damage counters from Regigigas. This power cannot be used, though, if Regigigas is affected by a special condition, which is something that all Pokepowers had to abide by. So just a really interesting ability and a really interesting mechanic. The attack is also super interesting, requiring water fighting metal colors. So if you thought amazing rares were annoying, then there used to be Pokemon with equally annoying attacks. Giga Blaster does 100 damage, and then you discard the top card of your opponent's deck, then choose one card from your opponent's hand without looking and discard it. Regigigas can't use Giga Blaster during your last turn. However, it is worth mentioning that you can use attacks and Pokepowers or Pokebodies from your previous evolution, just like Pokemon Break. So, very cool cards. I kind of wish Pokemon would go back to Level X at some point. Admittedly, tuned down a bit because despite there being a lot of cool Level X's at the time, I don't think Pokemon, I don't trust Pokemon not to just redo this mechanic and then only make one or two of them super broken. Kind of like how they did with V-Stars, because let's be honest, only a handful of V-Stars really do see play. Next up, I just want to quickly go over is Dusknoir and Flagon, both of which are also Level X's. This video won't be just Level X Pokemon, don't worry. I just wanted to take a look at these guys pretty quickly. So Dusknoir has this really big and wordy ability that essentially amounts to when Dusknoir is knocked out, you can choose to discard all cards attached to it and put it in play as a stadium card. And basically put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon between turns as well as a form of that ability. As that stadium, I should say. If another stadium card, however, comes into play, or Dusknoir Level X is discarded by the effects of any attacks, Pokepowers, Pokebodies, Trainer, or Supporter cards, you get to return Dusknoir Level X to your hand. So it's such a cool and interesting ability / Pokepower. Why I don't think Pokemon typically do these kind of abilities anymore is I think they just want to try and appeal to maybe a more younger audience, which is also why their graphics are more like vibrant colors and such. But I kind of wish Pokemon would return to more complicated effects and powers like these, because it's just so much more interesting than a lot of the abilities nowadays, which come across as frankly quite generic. Like, we've recently seen a Tinkerton, for example, that has the exact same ability as an Hisuian Samurott that came out just the other year. So it's kind of like, why are they rehashing the same kind of boring abilities when they could be doing some more interesting ones like these? And this Flagon, even though it's not like as interesting, you could say, it still has a pretty cool Pokebody. Wind Erosion, as long as Flagon is your active Pokemon, discard the top card from your opponent's deck between turns. So it's just like additional mill effect. Admittedly, Flagon would evolve from a stage 2, so that's very annoying, obviously, but still, Wind Erosion, very strong. And then Extreme Attack, choose one of your opponent's level X Pokemon, and this attack does 150 to that Pokemon. So you can typically just KO most of our level X's with Extreme Attack. So just some cool cards to bear in mind. I kind of wish Pokemon, of course, would go back to these more unique and exciting abilities on level X, but, I guess they just want to change things up a bit. Next up, I just want to take a look at is this, I believe it's Tyranitar? Yeah, so we've got this Tyranitar EX, which was featured on the thumbnail, and for good reason. It has 4 unique attacks. So, for those of you who weren't aware now, well, you're aware now that Pokemon used to have 4 attacks, and that's really cool. I don't know why they really stopped this, to be honest, because I think this was such a cool design choice to give Pokemon 3 or 4 attacks. I do kind of understand maybe why they removed them, because they wanted to, like focus more on the artwork. So for Fallout cards and stuff, you really couldn't get away with having more than 1 or 2 attacks or abilities. But having 4 attacks did open up so many doors to creativity and choice, because, it means you could essentially use this card no matter how many energy was attached to it. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it just gives you a lot of choice in which attacks you use and how much energy you want to commit to a Pokemon. I think it'd be really cool if Pokemon did eventually go back to Pokemon with 3 or 4 attacks. Also worth mentioning, this Tyranitar also has 2 different types of weakness, which is pretty interesting, I guess. I didn't notice that initially when I looked at it. So just a pretty cool card overall, and something I wish Pokemon would go back to. Next up, we've got another Tyranitar EX. This time, though, I want to take a look at this Delta species Tyranitar, because it was not only a different typing, so Tyranitar is usually dog type in the TCG, this one is lightning type. It has this really interesting attack, Electro Mark, that says put a shockwave marker on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this, I'm assuming, would have been marked with like any kind of counter, really. And then it has the attack Shockwave that says choose one of your opponent's Pokemon that has any Shockwave markers on it, and that Pokemon is knocked out. So it's sort of like a 2-hit KO, but even if your opponent retreats, then they will assumingly still have the marker on. So you can just KO that Pokemon with the Shockwave marker on it. Pretty cool attacks, to be honest. I think this is a pretty cool card. To be honest, this would only work nowadays if, it was on an EX stage 2, because, of course, if this was just on a regular stage 2, it would just get KO'd instantly, especially if, with a power creep and the amount of damage Pokemon can toss out. But still, very cool attacks, and, something worth bearing in mind, and kind of something I wish Pokemon would maybe go back to. Next up, we've got another EX to look at. This time it's Flagon. I just thought Flagon had a really interesting Pokebody. If Flagon EX is damaged by an opponent's attack, you may discard up to 4 cards from your hand. If you do, any damage done to Flagon EX is reduced by 10 for each card you discarded. Such a cool and unique ability. Of course, it will thin out your hand quite a bit, and you'll be discarding resources. But you could essentially resist up to 40 damage. And I'm really surprised, honestly, that we haven't seen an ability like this since, basically. I think it's really cool. Of course, it does have its limitations. You would have to limit how powerful this was. And there has been a lot of Pokemon lately that just have this like generic ability of this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. It would be much more interesting to see Pokemon that maybe could resist up to 40 or maybe even 50 damage to compensate for the power creep. But, would you be discarding 4 or 5 cards at that point? So it's a really cool ability, and this is the kind of thing that I'd like Pokemon to do more of, potentially, in the future. Next up, we've actually got a couple of stadiums to look at. This first one is going to be Holland Lake. So essentially, each player's Pokemon that has Delta species on its card can use attacks on this card instead of its own. So it's a stadium that provides an attack for all Delta species Pokemon in play. So Delta Call says search your deck for Pokemon that has Delta on its card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. So you could use this to find just other Delta species Pokemon. I honestly think it's really strange we haven't seen any more stadiums that provide attacks. I guess they are hard to balance with the power creep, but to be honest, I don't think it would kill them to release the old stadium that just had an interesting effect, especially considering that the most recent stadiums revealed for Paldea Evolved essentially have the same effects that we've seen on other stadiums recently. I mean, you think of like Wilderness of Disaster, the one that increases retreat cost. That one is essentially a slightly worse version of Galar Mine. And then the other one, like the Snowy Hazard Stadium, the one that says whenever you attach non-water energy, you place 2 damage counters, that's just a rehash of Old Cemetery from the earlier days of Sword and Shield as well. So it would be cool if maybe they were a little bit more experimental with stadium cards, and stuff like Holland Lake could become more common. Lastly, though, we've got Pewter City Gym, which is a really old card, and I just wanted to bring this up for reference because this is a gym that affects Brock's Pokemon in play. And this is something that Pokemon has kind of stayed away from in terms of stadiums just interacting, I should say, with certain trainers or gym leaders. And I think that's a bit of a shame because, obviously a city gym should like react with the Pokemon gym leaders or the Pokemon gym leaders Pokemon, I should say. But, just something worth bearing in mind. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think down below. It's been our power. And yeah, thank you for watching.